A recent study came out showing that 70% of employees have a conflict that they've been avoiding at work for 3 months. 3/4 of employees have a conversation that they need to have with a boss, with a coworker, with a direct report that they've been avoiding or delaying for 3 months. But it gets worse. 1/3 of employees have been putting off that conversation for a year. We don't like conflict. We don't even like to be around conflict. But let's be honest, we can't talk about it, and we certainly can't talk about conflict resolution until we talk about what we've learned about conflict. So where do we learn this? Where do we learn to avoid? Where do we learn to deal with conflict in unconstructive ways? Well, we learned it from those wonderful, loving people that we grew up with, our families. Several years ago, I was teaching a class on conflict resolution, and one evening we were having a very similar conversation. And one of the students said, "You know, Jeff, as I look back on my family growing up, we really didn't have any conflict. There were no arguments, we didn't shout at each other. It was really a very peaceful household." We thought that was very unusual and very rare, but pretty phenomenal. Well, a week later, she came back, and she'd had some time to think and to reflect. And she said, "You know, the more I think about it, I realize now there was conflict, and there was tension in my family, but it was under the surface and nobody wanted to deal with it." And she said, "What bothers me even more is I see the same thing happening with my family now." There's a lot of information out there about conflict in families, but here's what we do know. The primary role models for conflict behavior are our parents. No matter what your parental situation was like, the way that we learn about conflict is by watching our parents. Children watch, they observe, they absorb everything around them. So much so that as early as age 8, children are already exhibiting the problem-solving behaviors and conflict styles that they will continue to use as adults. As early as age 8. What is that? Second grade. By second grade, I'm already handling conflict the same way I will in my adult relationships, the same way I will in the workplace. Now, I don't know about you, but I certainly know some adults who behave like 8-year-olds at times. But that's pretty incredible to think that early those patterns are already established. Think about when you were growing up. Families tend to have rules around conflict, and they tend to have rituals around conflict. What were the rules in your family? When there was conflict, did you fight? Did you argue? Did you shout? Did we get real quiet and go to our rooms and close the doors behind us? Could we raise our voice? Could we slam doors? Could we throw pots and pans? Your family had rules, and these rules weren't written down. They weren't in the family manual. In fact, there is no such thing as a family manual. But children learn very quickly what's appropriate and what's not appropriate. There are also patterns of conflict behaviors that families tend to exhibit. Rituals, almost a dance of conflict. Again, think back to when you were growing up. Who initiated the conflict? Who tended to be the one to put the conflict out there? And then who responded by pushing back? Who responded by leaving the room, by avoiding? Was there a harmonizer in your family? Somebody who kind of came in and smoothed things over? Those are all patterns of conflict that tend to play out again and again and again. Ultimately, to understand our attitudes around conflict and our behaviors, we need to understand where they came from. So here's my challenge to you. What did your family teach you about conflict? And what are you teaching your family?